I never thought my ordinary walk home from school would turn into a nightmare. It was a gloomy autumn afternoon, the sky overcast and the wind biting. As a 15-year-old girl, I had walked this route countless times, always feeling safe and secure in my familiar neighborhood. As I turned onto the tree-lined street leading to my house, I felt an uneasy feeling settle in the pit of my stomach. It was that strange sensation you get when you think someone is watching you, even though there's no one in sight. I glanced around, trying to shake off the feeling, but there was no one there. I continued walking, pulling my jacket tighter around me, trying to focus on the sound of my own footsteps, but the feeling persisted. That's when I noticed a black sedan slowly creeping along the street behind me. I couldn't see the driver, but the car seemed to be keeping pace with me. My heart began to race, and a cold sweat broke out on my brow. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was just someone driving slowly because of the weather. I quickened my pace, hoping to put some distance between me and the car, but as I sped up, so did the sedan. Panic welled up inside me, and I knew I had to do something. I decided to take a detour, cutting through the park that I knew was a shortcut to my house. As I turned off the main road, I dared to glance back, and my heart sank as I saw the sedan turn right behind me. The park was deserted, and I knew that if the driver was truly stalking me, there would be no one around to help. My heart pounded in my chest and adrenaline surged through my veins. I sprinted across the park, ducking behind trees and bushes, praying that the driver wouldn't spot me. I could hear the car's engine idling nearby, and I knew they were searching for me. I held my breath, trying to make myself as small as possible, hoping that the thick foliage would shield me from view. As I huddled behind a large oak tree, I heard the car door open and the crunch of footsteps on the damp leaves. I peeked around the tree and saw a tall, hooded figure emerging from the sedan. The sight of him sent a shiver down my spine, and I knew that I had to get away. With my heart in my throat, I took off running, ignoring the pain in my side and the branches that clawed at my face. I could hear the heavy footsteps of my pursuer closing in, but I refused to look back. My house was just around the corner, and I knew that if I could make it there, I would be safe. I burst through my front door, slamming it shut behind me and locking it with shaking hands. I collapsed on the floor, tears streaming down my face as I listened to the sound of the stalker's footsteps receding into the distance. From that day on, my walk home from school was never the same. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and I always made sure to take a different route each day. My close encounter with a stalker left me with a constant, chilling reminder that danger could be lurking just around the corner, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The day had been busier than usual at the quaint little flower shop where I worked in our small town. I was 21 and had been working there for a couple of years, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere and the lovely scent of fresh flowers. As the day came to an end, I locked up the shop and began my walk home. It was early autumn and the sun was setting earlier, bathing the streets in a warm golden glow. My walk home was usually a pleasant and uneventful part of my day. As I strolled along the tree-lined streets, I reveled in the beauty of the leaves changing colors and the crisp, cool air. But tonight, as I rounded a corner, I saw something that made me feel uneasy. A small group of people stood together a short distance away, their faces obscured by the shadows. They looked out of place, dressed in dark clothing and not engaging in any conversation with each other. It was an odd sight in our usually friendly town, and I couldn't help but feel a shiver of unease. As I continued walking, I noticed the group began to follow me, maintaining a consistent distance. Their silence and the deliberate way they moved sent a wave of fear through me. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, but I couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread. My heart raced as I picked up my pace, hoping to create some distance between us. However, the group kept up with me, their footsteps echoing ominously in the quiet evening. I knew I had to find a way to lose them before I reached my home, where I would be alone and vulnerable. In a moment of desperation, I decided to take a shortcut through a narrow alleyway that led to the main street. The shadows grew darker as I entered the alley, and I prayed that the group wouldn't follow me. I fumbled for my phone, preparing to call for help if necessary. As I emerged onto the well-lit main street, I glanced back to see if the group had followed me. To my relief, they were nowhere in sight. I felt a mix of fear and gratitude. I quickly made my way home, double-checking that all the doors and windows were locked before collapsing onto the couch. The encounter with the mysterious group left me shaken, but I never saw them again. I want to keep myself anonymous in this story, but this is how it all went down. It all started innocently enough. I began to notice an increase in followers on my social media accounts. As someone who enjoyed sharing my thoughts, interests, and experiences, I welcomed the new audience with open arms. Little did I know that one of these followers would soon become the source of my nightmares. As the days went by, I started to notice that one particular user seemed to like and comment on almost every post I made. At first, it felt flattering, like I had a fan who truly appreciated my content. But then the comments began to grow increasingly personal and invasive. There was this one person in particular who would constantly comment on my daily activities like he knew the taste of that coffee was good, or that he also likes to shop for food there and stuff like that. The realization that this person was observing my daily life and routine sent chills down my spine. I decided to confront them by sending a direct message, asking them to stop making such personal remarks. The response I got was a simple, unsettling smiley face. From that moment on, I knew I was dealing with a social media stalker. I tightened my privacy settings and stopped posting about my daily life, hoping to deter this person, but that only seemed to embolden them. One evening, as I scrolled through my feed, I stumbled upon a photograph that made my heart skip a beat. It was a picture of my own house, taken from a distance, and posted by my stalker. I couldn't believe my eyes. My safe haven, my home, had been invaded by this faceless stranger. I reported the photograph to the social media platform and contacted the police, but without any concrete evidence, there was little they could do to help me. Fear consumed my every thought as I wondered what this person's intentions were. I installed security cameras around my home, checked the locks on my doors and windows obsessively, and became increasingly paranoid. My once carefree social media presence had become a breeding ground for anxiety and dread. I started to lose sleep, haunted by the thought that my stalker could be watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the days turned into weeks, the stalker's posts grew increasingly more creepy. Pictures of my house gave way to photographs taken from just outside my windows. Desperate for help, I turned to friends, family, and the authorities, but no one could identify the person behind the screen. One night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from my stalker containing a single photograph. The image was of my bedroom window, taken from inside my own backyard. My heart raced, and the air around me felt suffocating as I realized my stalker was just outside. Without a moment's hesitation, I dialed 911 and whispered my situation to the operator. They advised me to lock myself in a room and wait for the police to arrive. As I hid, the adrenaline and fear surged through my veins, and I prayed that help would arrive in time. Finally, the sound of sirens filled the air, and I heard officers shouting outside my house. They managed to apprehend my stalker, a man who had become obsessed with me through social media. He had been watching me, following me, and documenting my life for months. In the aftermath, I became a different person, forever changed by the experience. My story is a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking in the digital world, and how a simple online presence can sometimes lead to a terrifying, life-altering encounter. My friend Emily and I have known each other since we were kids. We grew up in the same neighborhood and went to the same school. When she was 13 years old, she had a terrifying experience that still sends chills down her spine whenever she recounts the story. One day after school, Emily decided to walk home by herself. Her usual route involved strolling along a quiet residential street lined with trees and well-kept houses. She had walked this way countless times before, and it had always been uneventful. As Emily turned onto the street, she noticed a white van parked a little further ahead. She didn't think much of it at first, assuming it belonged to a local resident or someone doing maintenance work in the area. As she continued walking, she suddenly felt an odd sense of unease. Without warning, the van's engine roared to life, and it began to creep slowly alongside her. The side door slid open, revealing a man wearing a hooded sweatshirt. Panic surged through Emily as she realized what was happening. She began to run, but the man leaped out of the van and chased after her, his footsteps echoing loudly in her ears. Just as the man was about to grab Emily, a nearby resident who happened to be walking his dog noticed the commotion. He shouted at the man and released his dog, which charged towards the would-be abductor, barking furiously. Startled, the man stopped in his tracks, and Emily seized the opportunity to put more distance between them. The dog's owner continued to shout, drawing the attention of other neighbors who rushed outside to see what was going on. Realizing he was outnumbered and with no chance of getting away unnoticed, the man sprinted back to the van and sped off, tires screeching against the pavement. The dog's owner quickly escorted Emily to the safety of her home, where her frantic parents had been alerted by the commotion. The police were called and they launched an investigation, but the man and his van were never found. Emily was left deeply shaken by the experience, forever grateful to the quick-thinking neighbor and his loyal dog for coming to her rescue. When my mother was young, she lived in a small house on the outskirts of town. She was in her early 20s and was working at a local restaurant. Life was relatively simple back then, but one chilling experience from her past still haunts her to this day. It all began when my mother started to notice a strange man hanging around her workplace. At first, she thought he was just another customer who liked the food, but as time went on, she realized that he would often linger, watching her from afar. He never spoke to her, but his eyes seemed to follow her every move. She brushed it off as a harmless crush, but her instincts told her that something was wrong. When she would walk home from work, she occasionally spotted the same man at a distance, lurking in the shadows. The unease grew with every encounter, and she began to feel like a prey being stalked by a predator. One evening, after returning home from work, my mother discovered that her front door was unlocked. Panic surged through her, as she was certain that she had locked it before leaving that morning. The house felt different, like someone had been inside. She cautiously stepped in. As she moved through the dimly lit rooms, she noticed that some of her belongings had been moved or tampered with. The eerie realization that an intruder had been inside her home sent shivers down her spine. She quickly called the police, who arrived and searched the house. They found no one, but the distinct feeling that she was not alone persisted. The police were stationed outside that night. Later that day, as my mother lay in bed, she heard a faint creaking sound coming from the hallway. Her heart raced, and she knew that her stalker had returned. Silently, she slipped out of bed and hid in her closet, trying to muffle her breathing as her entire body trembled with fear. She could hear him moving through the house, his footsteps drawing nearer and nearer. The air in the closet felt heavy, suffocating as she listened to the intruder search for her. It was as if he knew she was there, hiding from him. Suddenly, the wail of sirens filled the air, and the sound of police cars approaching grew louder. Her stalker must have realized that he had been discovered, for he rushed out of the house just as the police arrived. My mother emerged from her hiding place, shaken and tearful, but grateful that the police had scared him away. Despite their best efforts, the police were never able to catch the man who had terrorized my mother. Over time, the fear subsided, and life returned to normal. However, she could never shake the feeling that her stalker was still out there, watching her from the shadows. She would occasionally catch a glimpse of a familiar face in a crowd or sense a presence when she was alone, but she could never be sure if it was him or just her imagination.